Welcome to the How of Business with your host, Henry Lopez, the podcast that helps you start, run, and grow your small business. And now, here is your host.
Welcome to the How of Business podcast. This is Henry Lopez. My guest today is Wesley Henderson. Wesley, welcome to the show.
Henry, thanks for having me. Excited to be with you.
Same. Wesley is an attorney, and so he's going to share with us some legal considerations. We're going to jump around various topics that he advises small business clients on, and I think were great topics for us to discuss. So that's what we're going to focus on this episode. You can find all of the How of Business resources, including the show notes page for this episode, because Wesley has a special offer for us, and I'll have the link for it on that show notes page. You can find that, as well as information about my one-on-one and group coaching programs at thehowofbusiness.com. Also invite you to think about supporting the show and joining our business community on Patreon, and subscribe wherever you might be listening so you don't miss any new episodes. Let me tell you a little bit more about Wesley. Wesley Henderson is more than just a business attorney. He's also an entrepreneur who understands firsthand the challenges and opportunities of running a business, particularly a small business. As a founder of multiple ventures, including Henderson and Henderson, Driving for Downs Incorporated, and Drafted Legal, he brings real-world experience to his legal practice and to our conversation today. Wesley helps business owners across South Carolina, but the services that he also offers, for example, the contracts that we're going to talk about, those are available to any of us nationwide. But he's based in South Carolina, where he navigates complex legal issues from startup formation and partnership agreements to employment law and business litigation. His goal is to provide practical, business-minded legal solutions that help entrepreneurs protect and grow their companies with confidence. He lives in the Charleston, South Carolina area. So once again, Wesley Henderson, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to chatting with you.
Absolutely. I always like to start with legal episodes with a quick disclaimer. So if you'll just give us a quick legal disclaimer, please.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be as helpful as I can today, but anybody on the other side, I don't know anything about their particular circumstance. I'm not your lawyer, but I'd be welcome to having that conversation. But everything I'm saying is trying to be as helpful as possible. But again, there's nuances in the law, so you might want to follow up with your own lawyer or contact us. Excellent.
Well said. Thank you for that. So I'm always curious, just personally, you've been an attorney for how long now?
2010, so 15 years, November of 2010.
What do you, at this point, what is one of the things that comes to mind that you enjoy most about being an attorney?
My current iteration, which I guess I've been in for about 11 years, is my favorite. I'm one of those who started off in that corporate, big, multi-regional law firm. And I never got the same satisfaction or purpose out of that as I do now, which is one-to-one working with business owners. I represent business owners entirely. Being able to employ creativity to solve problems and being able to help solve actual problems. Your audience may not know lawyers are billing hours and, point twos and point ones. Sometimes it feels like a lot of homework when you're at a really big law firm. And, ever since starting our own firm, it feels a lot more like we're actually providing a very valuable service that a business owner can help navigate something that's otherwise difficult. And still may be difficult, but we're their partner trying to help them get through it the best they can. More and more, we like to be in the preventative side of it. So I really enjoy working with clients in their business. Also, as ours has grown, I've really enjoyed running, trying to step into these, the operations and learning more about the business of a law firm than just the practice of law, which is, I probably split my time 50-50 on that at this point.
Certainly, I'm sure you see much more impact than when you were in the corporate environment on the individual business owner. Is much more impactful, I got to think, the work that you and your team does, right?
Oh, yeah. So I was working for, a lot of the large law firms represent insurance companies.
I see.
And not only that, but I was low man on the totem pole and so, getting handed what felt like homework. And I thought, you felt like you've already paid your dues getting through. But it's part of the process. Really, I learned a ton and it was very helpful. And usually I recommend to young lawyers who want to go out on their own and to go get some experience. There's a lot of great lawyers at those law firms, and you learn a lot by doing it.
A lot to learn. Did you think you were going to start your own firm when you were in law school? Was that the goal?
No, I didn't really take it as a goal. I don't think I never had the 10-year plan. I just kind of went through. Was always pretty decent at school and did well in some of the LSAT and that sort of thing. And so just kind of naturally went into it, was interested. But I had no intention to or not to. I will say I took a solo practice or small firm course in law school. So maybe I did more than I realized. And I
Right.
can't remember if I did it because I thought it was easy or if I did it because I wanted to. But, so there's always been a little entrepreneur. I was always selling this or that, when I was 10 years old or whatever.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into it tactically. I wanted to start with the topic that's often, the big question, especially for people who are looking to start their business, is a legal entity. Do I need a legal entity? Why? Why can't they just operate as a sole proprietor? And lots of people do, especially solopreneurs are operating as a sole proprietor. Is it an LLC? Is it a corporation? I'd like to start with your guidance on why, well, my opinion is and experience is we should limit or not operate as a sole proprietor. But what's your opinion and thoughts on that?
Yeah, my opinion is you're correct. You obviously have a lot of business experience, and so I think that you're right to encourage, your group here and your audience and your group coaching. As soon as you start doing anything in the market, you have exposure. I wish that wasn't the case because I know people want to tiptoe in and test this or that, but we see it all the time. Things go south very quickly. And you're usually not the biggest target for someone to go sue if you're new out there. But if you cause damage to somebody or something goes wrong, you're going to get sued personally. And they're going to look for a home or a car, jewelry or whatever it is. Or they're going to be a thorn in your side, send you to collection, whatever it is. And it happens like that. And there's a lot of personalities that you don't see it coming from. So you kind of want to always treat everyone great as a client, but with the same sort of, seriousness that there is exposure if you don't, if things don't go accordingly. It's always my advice, it depends on what state you're in. The state I'm in, it's incredibly inexpensive to get an LLC. There's no annual fee. There's no annual paperwork. It's, $145 to file the LLC, that kind of thing.
Right.
Some states are a lot more. And so that can, you can sometimes convince yourself to get insurance instead. But insurance does a different thing than LLCs. LLCs step in as a different entity than you are. Meaning if something goes wrong, the LLC gets sued. Whereas insurance decides, one, whether the thing that's happening gets covered. And if they do decide to cover you, they're doing it on your behalf.
Right.
I've got a client right now that's a mold company, do mold remediation out of our law firm. And so there's a big mold issue, and there's about a dozen people involved in this lawsuit or lawyers. And the insurance company for my client is denying coverage on a mold claim.
Wow.
And he does mold for a living. I say that just to say, I think insurance is good, but it'll surprise you. You go and get it, and you don't ever think about it. And then you start looking through the language, and you're like, what did you cover?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you clarified that and gave that example. I always have explained it that, insurance is kind of an umbrella, a little bit of a shield, and we must have it. But at the end of the day, what gives us the best liability protection, unless we, commit fraud and commit a crime, is that the assets, our personal assets, are separate from the legal assets of the business, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to explain it. They're kind of two different shields. We always explain it as your first thing is your contract and your conduct too. And then you've got insurance, and then your catch-all is this LLC. And it's important to hear stories like the one I'm telling you, because you can rely on the insurance, and they're not your friend always. I don't know if you've been on the other side of them or with them. We use it, don't get me wrong, and I 100% recommend it. I'm not saying that. You just can't rely on it with full confidence.
I've had to sue insurance companies before to give me what I was supposed to get, right? So yeah, it's a process. But great point on that. I agree with you. That's been my experience on the sole proprietorship. Now, the big question everybody always has, and I always, I never give that direct advice because I can't. I'm not an attorney. And so we're not going to give that direct advice here to anybody who's listening. But generally speaking, what are the considerations on LLC versus a corporation? And then, of course, you can explain the S Corp component of it.
Yeah. I think I can clarify it a good bit. The corporation has been around a long time. It's clunkier, it's bigger, it's Microsoft and Walmart. There are some reasons why smaller, someone in your audience might have a corporation, but they're usually very, very specific tax reasons. The default is you're going to start with an LLC unless someone tells you to do it otherwise. The corporation is a lot more expensive, a lot more effort. The legal, even in South Carolina, you have to have a lawyer file your corporation.
Oh, interesting.
You cannot file your own corporation. A lawyer has to sign it. Just to give you an idea of, obviously the costs go through the roof compared, to being able to use something like our service or a LegalZoom or do it on your own, that kind of thing. So the LLCs are newer, came around in the 80s. They're done by the states. They're designed to be more flexible. They're designed for people like us who want to start a business and have some flexibility and kind of grow with it. You can grow with it. You can add people to it. You can sell parts of it. You can control who gets to vote. And so it's really a lot better to work with, I think, than a corporation. The S Corp's an interesting thing. I'd say most of the internet gets it a little bit off. It's kind of like a misnomer. So it's called an S Corp, but it's a tax election. So
a tax treatment or election, yeah.
Yeah, so when you're looking at your entity, it's an LLC is one, a corporation is one, a sole proprietor is one, a partnership is one. Partnership being two people who don't have an LLC, basically. And so you're double exposed. That's probably the worst. But then there's tax elections that are different. An S election or S corp can be out of an LLC, and often, very, very often is often recommended. We're not tax pros, but that's the consideration there. So sometimes we'll have people say, should I do this or that? I'm like, just get in the LLC, and then you can talk to an accountant, and they can file the form to get you as an S. And you can sometimes do them retroactive. You're supposed to do it within 90 days or some amount of days, but you can still make that election out of it. Sometimes people feel that that's an either or. It's actually an and. Mm-hmm. And it's a big difference of the and, because sometimes people get a little paralysis not knowing which one to do. And I'm like, if I'm giving advice on something like this, get the LLC at least and figure that out, because you don't want to be exposed like we were just talking about.
Agreed. Yeah. And my experience, obviously, from a tax perspective, so you definitely want to consult with your CPA, but that's, I think, just about every business I've had, almost, with exception of maybe one, because it was already a corporation. LLC S Corp treatment, which makes it a pass-through entity. Therefore, you avoid the double taxation, essentially, in a simplified way. Fair? This is Henry Lopez, briefly pausing this episode to invite you to schedule a free coaching consultation with me. I welcome the opportunity to chat with you about your business plans and offer the guidance and accountability that we all need to achieve success. As an experienced small business owner myself, I understand the challenges you're experiencing, and often it's about helping you ask the right questions to help you make progress towards achieving your goals. Whether it's getting started with your first business or growing and maybe exiting your existing small business, I can help you get there. To find out more about my business coaching services and to schedule your free coaching consultation, please visit thehowofbusiness.com. Take that next step today towards finally realizing your business ownership dreams. I look forward to speaking with you soon. Now, I think that also, to your point, sometimes the reason we don't necessarily have to stress about it in that first year is we're probably going to have a loss in that first year, right? So that kind of passes through. So it can get done. Don't overthink it. And to your point about how cheap it is, I've created LLCs in Texas, in Florida, and in the state of New York. I've gone to the state websites. It's relatively easy and very low fees. Now, for example, Florida has an annual fee. Texas has what they call a franchise tax, even though it's not a franchise. So yeah, there's some additional filing fees, but it's easy to do yourself, especially, and this is something I hadn't put on the list to talk about, but I want your thoughts on, Wesley. I always advise people that when you need an attorney definitively is when you have more than just yourself owning the business, when you're going to have to develop an operating agreement that needs to cover somebody else. What are your thoughts there? In other words, if it's just me, I could go with a standard operating agreement. Is that fair, or what am I missing there?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Even out of our law firm, when we have some, we have plenty of people who come to us to set the whole thing up. Mm-hmm. We're happy to do it, but the fees are just so much lower than if there are more than one person, because we just use a pretty straightforward template, and I explain it to them. There's nothing for us to customize because you get to make all the decisions.
Right.
But I say, if you're going to bring somebody else on, we need to have different conversations so that we really analyze when the voting, is there a manager managed, and there are certain types of filings like term versus perpetual that have consequences, but all those consequences are typically when there's a second person. Even right. On our Drafted Legal website, it's the multi-member. We have a clause in there that says, when we're making a certain amount of money, we'll go get a lawyer. We basically encourage people to have the big conversations. What's our vision, which I think helps drive a lot of it. who owns what, because you wouldn't believe how many disputes we have come through the door in the matter of a year, and there's no paperwork that says who owns what. Like, yeah, it's nuts. So it just kind of walks through the very basics, just if people don't have the budget to do that and they want to go play with somebody, but it still says you need to talk to a lawyer because this stuff can get really tricky later on.
Absolutely. And I talk about this so much on this podcast, Wesley, because I prefer working in partnership, and I've had partnerships that have worked out well and others that have not. But I see so many people going blindly into partnerships. They're in that honeymoon phase, even with family. Oh, what could possibly go wrong? A lot goes wrong. Anything you can imagine goes wrong, especially once money gets involved, either because we're making it or losing it. People's goals change. So the tightness of that operating agreement I have found is critical to either not ending up fighting and hating each other and suing each other, and even more critically, killing your business.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. As I always try to explain to people, it's not that the person you're going into business with is going to turn on you and start stealing money. I mean, it happens.
Sure.
But life changes. And
Right.
you both may end up with spouses and family. You might have one spouse making $1 million a year and their need for the business is different, or someone gets sick and they got to move, or a parent just life throws a bunch of different things. So to remain in that same alignment that you have in the day you start, it's impossible.
It's impossible.
So having the right conversations and a lot of this is too just communication. When we bring people on, we force them to have some conversations that maybe other law firms don't, that are about the business, that I think just help have the right conversation. There's things that the operating agreement can do, but there's some things you can't legislate everything. You can't put it all in there. So you got to have the ability to work with each other. And if you don't have that, you're going to have trouble. And I'll tell you, here's what I normally see when we get disputes, and it's probably 70% of them. It's one person thinks they're contributing way more than the other, whether it's through sheer hard work, through more sales, through they're smarter. There's some sort of resentment that develops. And I think that grows over time. And a lot of that is by not defining roles. Like right out of a business, there's no real roles. You kind of are like, you do this. But as you get bigger, you really need to step into your different roles and continue to work on respecting each other. And disagreeing is fine, obviously, but working within that. So that's usually what I'm seeing if people are looking for something. If you feel that way, or you think your business partner is feeling that way, get some coffee, have the conversation now, because once there's like the lawyering up, it becomes very expensive.
Yeah, well said, Wesley. I couldn't agree with you more. Of my experience personally and with clients that I've coached, I think that's incredible advice to take on this point. That communication, because to your point, if we wait until now, I am so mad at you that I can't see straight, that's hard to then come off of, right? Now my feelings are hurt. Now I'm resentful to the nth degree. We got to communicate and got to realize that to your point, that alignment that we may have had up front is going to change over time, right?
Yeah,
I mean, heck, it changes in a married couple. How the heck do we think it's not going to change between partners, right? Two or more partners.
Yeah, I think you nailed that.
Yeah, thank you for advice on that. All right, so speaking of common mistakes, talk here about partnership issues and the mistakes of not going with a legal entity and operating as a sole proprietor. What else do you see, Wesley, that are common mistakes that small business owners make from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I think you're insightful on your questions early on, because the entity is a big one. The partnership, in terms of having that conversation and just a thorough and ongoing conversation with each other, preferably operating agreement. But again, it's more than that. It's more of a commitment to the business and to each other. But the operating agreement creates a lot of important conversations. So those are two big ones. I'd say, people may hate to hear it, but having good contracts in place, the contracts is, you don't want to ever have to use them. And if you do it right, you don't ever have to use them. When you don't have them, we have disputes all the time, and I think both sides will pass lie detectors saying, oh, they promised this and I promised that. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I'm not a magician. I can't recreate whatever y'all agreed to. Sometimes it's on email, and sometimes there's a text message, but there's a phone call. And marketing, the beauty of the contract when they're really well done is it protects both parties. Our contracts aren't designed to, sneak something in. Our contracts are designed to be extremely clear and say, this is how we're going to operate I want to make sure you're on the same page I am. And it's expectation setting. So when you lose that sort of moment where we're like, this is it, these four corners, this is it. You lose the clarity of who's doing what. An example of sort of a new freelancer would be, let's say I'm designing a logo for you and you're going to pay me 10 grand, and you pay me 5 grand up front, and you just don't like it. And I go back and I keep working and you still don't like it, and you just never like it, but I'm doing, I'm 70, 80, 5 times the amount of effort in. And you still don't like it, so you're like, I'm not paying you. I didn't get a logo that I wanted. Compared to having an agreement where it says, I'm going to do the best I can, I'm going to create a logo, and then we will have 2 revisions. That will be my deliverable, and upon that second revision, you owe me the remainder of the money. And it's all yours, and you can do what you want. There's a trigger point for when that final payment is owed.
Right.
My job, you're wanting to make clients happy, so don't get me wrong, but you got to have a trigger for when that deliverable is met. We see this all the time with kind of new service professionals or, providing a service, and just kind of keep working and keep working and keep working. They call it scope creep.
Right.
I'm sure you've heard this term. And the contracts, not only, it's the end of scope creep, because you can just point to it and it gives you some firmness. You can go above and beyond. I support being a hard worker but you got to have the line to draw when it's going nowhere, and you got to have the trigger that says, I've met my deliverables. I've done what I promised to do. You can't build a business on just working endlessly over, and you get 2 or 3 of those in a row, and all of a sudden you're out of money, and your spouse is banging on your door. What's going on? You spent a month on this, or 8 months.
Yeah, that's such a great example, Wesley. Thanks for sharing that, because that is an example of where we think, well, how do we define this? Well, you can put scope to it, and you must put scope to it. And again, doesn't mean that I can't go beyond that scope, but I've got some definition to it, because you've got to protect yourself. There will be people that will abuse it if you don't. You've got to have something to fall on. It's amazing to me how often I talk to clients and they have no agreements or contracts in place, right? I have a client right now, and he'll know who I'm talking about just because of the mention of it, that had no agreements in place for a service that he delivers. And part of the idea probably was, this was a business that was started by his father 30 years ago, handshake kind of relationships. We don't need contracts here. Our word is the value. And by the way, we let people out of, it's a month-to-month agreement anyway, so why have a contract? That's such first of all, maybe it worked 30 years ago. I don't think it did, but in today's day and age, we cannot afford to do that anymore, can we?
Yeah, I would love a world where the handshake was the thing.
Right.
It is not the world that I see practicing law day to day.
No.
And you're creating these contracts not for your 95% of your clients. You're creating them for that 5. Really, I'd probably call them 1 to 2%.
Right.
And you had no chance. You just kind of got fooled to begin with somehow. And you took on a client that you shouldn't have. Maybe your personalities were aligned. Maybe that's just a difficult client. But there are often times where I know there's a client we don't want to work for. And it's nothing against them. It's nothing against me. It's just the way I practice law. I know they're not going to be happy.
It's not a fit. Yeah.
It's not a good fit. Certainly that takes some time to grow into. That's not what I was saying day one. I'm just trying to work and do everything I can. So you are designing for that 1%. I'm always trying to encourage people. We're not calling everybody bad. We're not saying everybody's a problem. That 1% there's just going to be a problem, and you want to have the agreement in place. Yeah. There are things too, as you're growing your business, that I would just point out is, let's say you're growing some sort of agency business. You take the logo again. You've hired someone else, and they're doing the logo work, and someone else is doing some sort of marketing or pay-per-click or some sort of thing where we're growing off, and we've got other people. And you've spent 5 years, 3 years, 2 years developing this brand, developing a relationship, and then you got one person who's kind of the project manager. It's not fair for that person to go undercut you and take that client or pitch that client. So just in a simple agreement, you say, look, you're not allowed to solicit clients you worked with. It's called a non-solicit. They apply to many things. It's a fair type of thing. The non-compete is a different kind of conversation.
Right. A lot of news lately here on the non-competes, for employees, but that's separate from part of a business agreement or contract, right? And non-solicitation.
Yeah, absolutely. And this non-solicit, we represent employees on all these things. We represent employers primarily, but we see all sides of it. And there's no one, very rarely does someone say, oh, that's unfair for me to not basically poach this kind of work. Right. People do find there's a different kind of conversation depending on the job, on the non-compete, and someone's ability to earn a living. It's a little more nuanced. They're certainly relevant and enforceable in a lot of areas. Sometimes they feel too much. But then, if you're growing a business, you want to be able to protect what you're investing into it. And so contracts can also do things like that. They can protect your trade secrets. Our business has been around 11 years now. So there's all these things that don't feel like trade secrets that actually are. Our marketing funnel, we have different marketing funnels, how we do referrals, like our internal rules on how we follow up with clients to make sure that we're providing the service. So as you develop these, if someone were to take all those and apply them to their own business, it's a little bit unfair. So you just at least want to say, you can go do your own thing, but I get to keep all my things.
Yeah, all your intellectual property is yours, and we clearly define that. That's the other thing. I see that mistake often because my understanding, Wesley, correct me if I'm wrong, as we kind of take a little bit of tangent. If somebody creates something for my company as a W-2 employee, I believe the default is that IP is mine, although I may need to clarify that. If I have a contractor, though, that's supposed to be explicitly stated in that contract
work
agreement,
for hire.
correct?
I think that's the right understanding.
Yeah. And that's another area where I need an agreement or a contract, right?
That's right. So, if you're looking at the areas I want to see agreements, it's with your client. So service agreement, probably always going to be your most important one because its clients are just the most important. Clients or customers are the most important part of business. That's just the way that is. Right. So that is a very important agreement. And then the second one is anyone you're working with, whether employees or contractors. And it's things like you're saying, it's just how much do we pay you? Anything you create for this is mine. And you're right. So like authors are the, inherent owner of what they create. If I'm creating a logo, I need to still assign that to you.
Right.
You're right in terms of the employee, but you still want to have that in there. Anything done pursuant to this job is mine. You don't want to be fighting a fight you didn't have to fight.
So even let's go, famously, the guy who invented the Post-it note for DuPont, I think it was, he was an employee. Now, maybe back then they didn't have these explicit agreement, but do larger organizations now, or even smaller organizations, now have clarifying agreements in place, even for a W-2 employee on who owns the IP?
Absolutely. A sophisticated business, or even like you say, I would be shocked if you have one, if that's the kind of role you're in. Absolutely. Everything is IP, assignment. There's a lot of times it's a separate agreement, just like a non-compete is a separate agreement to draw full attention to.
Got it. That
usually depends on kind of the role, what someone's doing there. But why would they leave it to chance? It's your opportunity to be clear. It's like, we're paying you for this, so this is what we get in exchange. And as you're starting a business, you do want to be thinking that way. That's not a bad way to think. It's you're being provided the service. I don't want to wake up in 7 years and now we have this thing that's working and I have to litigate who owns it.
Right.
When it was all originated by my undertaking.
Yeah. All right. You touched on, obviously we talk about IP, but trademarks I know is something that you like to also talk about. So give us your thoughts on trademarks.
Yeah. And I know you've touched on this in prior podcasts. Just the 2 cents on trademarks is, one, you got to make sure you're not infringing on someone else's. So you don't want to start a business and find out 3 years later that someone in Idaho had a federal trademark and they didn't have a good website, so you didn't find them.
Right.
So you want to go on the uspto.gov and search your trademark, and you want to search different spellings, different ways to spell it, and you just want to do a couple variations, and you're looking for people in the same industry. Sporting goods is different than restaurant, so you're still fine there. So that's step one. Step two is eventually getting to the point where you own your trademark, so someone else can't be. The whole idea is that the consumer is not confused about who they're buying something from. If my kids are buying Nikes, they better be Nikes, not somebody just pretending to look like Nikes.
Right.
Now, more often than not, they're kind of accidental in the real world, not someone intentionally ripping someone off. But even just in Charleston, it comes up in my practice at least once every couple months where there's an issue where someone thinks they're getting something from a different person. There's just so many businesses. The online nature spreads, the exposure. So it's a very important thing to look into. You can also use ChatGPT to run it through a ChatGPT. I was telling you before, the ability to search for trademarks is like 20 times easier than it was a year ago. So I would utilize that resource for sure. And then if it's a close call, you might want to bring in a lawyer just to make sure you're not wasting any money. But I always say, don't fall in love with a name as much as we love naming our business. Right. Get one that you own. That's important.
Excellent. Thank you for that. All right. Well, the last topic I want to dive into is handling objections or disputes, rather, not objections, disputes, whether it's in between partners or with a client or whatever it might be, or a vendor. One of the areas of practice expertise that you have in your firm is mediation. So let me ask you this way. What do you see as some of the one or two common things that gets people into a dispute? And maybe we can break it up by partnership disputes. That's often, we touched on that already, right?
I would say money gets people into dispute.
Okay.
Let's say a business service, somebody owes me money and they're not paying it to me. You and I own a business together and I'm working harder. That's still money time. And then there's just an ego element and a control element that always exists in the partnership. It's kind of a unique, separate thing. That can be a little more resentment building. In terms of the client facing, they didn't pay the amount that was owed, and that is a huge problem, especially for small businesses. That's probably your number one problem. You can work on something. We have in our drafted legal basically a strategy laid out to minimize the chances of that happening and to give you all the power if you need to push into it to do that. The dispute thing in general, I would say, if we're stepping back, it's a preventative process. The contract itself is not the greatest thing. You don't have to be a lawyer to write a contract. Anybody can write a contract. It's going through the exercise of asking the right questions. Did we address the things that become disputes? For example, what are the deliverables? When are they coming? When is payment owed? What happens if I don't get paid? Who owns this? Can I steal your employee? Where am I going to sue you? There's like 25 questions that come up over and over again, and you just want to address them in your contract. And verbally, you want... one of the things we pride ourselves in our contracts is that people are proud to send them to the client. We're not trying to send we hear a lot is you'll get something offline or a chat GPT and they're like, I don't know what this is. And I actually had this great client and I was embarrassed to send it. And so when we give them to them through, our legal bundle, they become proud then because they know the client is also protected. Right, now you're protected and you have to do what you're saying. But it's not this one-sided thing that someone's going to look at and be like, I don't want to work with this bozo. This is nuts.
It's a bilateral agreement that protects both parties here, right?
And in a service agreement or something, it should be.
That's right.
If we're selling a product, it's take it or leave it. And just, buy it off the shelf or don't. But you want to be on the same page. And that doesn't mean we set them up where you don't have to negotiate them. We set them up so that you're proud of them and they say, okay, I can work with this.
Yeah. I just, what comes to mind, I have a client that was building out a retail location, hired a general contractor, and there was language on what happens if they were late on finishing the project, but no language as to what the recourse was. Yeah. Right. So then it became this unnecessary dispute. It didn't escalate too much, but an unnecessary dispute and a lot of time and energy wasted figuring out, well, okay, what happens now that you're late?
Yeah, and you can't prove who's right because in contract law, you're starting to look at materiality. Was this a material breach? Mm-hmm. So you need to just say it. Yeah, time is of the essence. This is a material breach, and these are the consequences.
These are the consequences.
X of dollars a day. And so you just need to be clear. It needs to be clear. Everybody needs to be able to read it so that when you and I work together, we're excited. We're on the same page. This will take its own journey like every business does, every client relationship does, every relationship will have its own journey. But you've got some agreed upon rules on how our expectations of each other. And if there's a deviation, there's not that much fight to do. Somebody could come to me if there's no contract. I'm like, you may be right.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying we would win because of that.
Right.
Because, you don't know who the jury's going to identify with. And it also means that you're going to have to fight it for as long as the other party will. If I have a contract and the evidence shows that we did what we were supposed to, it's not going to last that long. Yeah. They're going to hire a lawyer and we'll be like, all right, what can we do to get this worked out? We've got a strong position. Right. We're not trying to hammer you. We just need to be made whole. And that usually goes well.
The courts favor, and judges typically, when it comes to these kind of things, favor what's in the contract. Is that true?
Oh, yeah.
Unless it's an egregious default or illegal or whatever the case might be, right? But otherwise, that's what the courts are trying to do, is uphold the contract. Is that fair?
And there's some clauses you want to put in there that are not unfair clauses that empower you to give you more leverage. There's things called prevailing party clauses, things like that, so that basically it gives you the ability to collect more, including your attorney's fees. we see these, we constantly see the chat GPT, and we very much embrace the ability to speed things up. But just a warning, we've got a client where we're litigating a case right now because they got some clauses, not the whole thing. I don't know where they got the rest of it, but some were written by a chat GPT thing, and it protected the opposite party in the way that he wanted to be protected. And so while this stuff, like there's a tool that we use that runs checks on things and speeds up what we do and reduces our, time into it and our costs. But it is still very, the hallucinations is just still a little ways away probably from being as useful as we wish it was.
Yeah.
It gets a little wordy too, and just kind of, it doesn't have that sort of dialed in pace right now. But it certainly is an interesting thing that we embrace in trying to provide more efficient services. But it is a little bit of a word of warning in terms of it'll pull like stuff from different states, countries. Protect the wrong side is what I see a lot of, is like it flips it back and forth. And like if you're looking at an indemnity clause, it took me like 3 years of being a lawyer before I could read those properly. Those are not easy to understand. And so you're not going to be able to read it and tell whether it's doing the right
or try to write it. One of the ways I'm using ChatGPT now is to help me interpret. I'm still going to have an attorney before I sign anything of consequence, but to interpret it and kind of give me some guidance. What are the general provisions here? What should I be aware of? What questions would I need to discuss with my attorney? So I'm using it that way more so than to try to generate a legal agreement per se.
Yeah, and I think it's really useful in that it kind of picks out the sections, and you just got to be a little careful. You got to make sure, but it certainly shortens these things.
It does, yeah.
Helpful.
But sometimes I'll just take a clause, a paragraph, and say, "What does this mean?" And it does generally a good job. I'm not going to take it for 100%, but it gives me some clarity. Oh, I see what they're trying to say here, especially in the negotiation process, right? Before I'm going to necessarily invest in a final review by my attorney as I'm reviewing or negotiating. All right, let's keep moving. Thank you for those insights here. We've been talking about it eventually. So tell me about these contracts that you offer and how you bundle those.
Yeah, so we've got them structured so they kind of grow with your business. They're there forever. When I'm talking earlier about disputes being preventative, I believe in that. I believe that when you're undergoing the effort on the front end, it prevents the problem. You have the conversation up front, and it may mean you lose a client once in a while. And I will have just done you a huge favor in my experience. If someone's afraid of what we're putting in front of them, I just saved you a world of time. Is not always the case, but it's probably close to 80-90% of the case. So we even have a full guarantee, a full refund. If you got to litigate a case, you got to involve a lawyer because of a dispute, we will refund your money. That's how helpful I think this process is. So I think there's 9 agreements in there. They're tailored to about 15 different industries. If your industry is not in there, we just recommend you email just to make sure it's not in there, and then we can entertain whether we would add that in there. It's important for it to be in your industry because the exposure is very, very different. This is actually what the genesis of creating this product was, is you see the legal Zooms, and they're just kind of got different names, but they're very generic.
Right.
And these are most written from our law firm and then kind of made a little bit more open, less tailored to that one specific. So a personal trainer, for example, or fitness, it's very different than a graphic designer or a marketing expert. The exposure is totally different. Right. We have them for podcasts and consultants, and they're very, it's very different exposure. And so as a lawyer, I'm always looking at your exposure point. And so we always make sure we address those in there. So, they start off with service agreements. They've got waivers, examples of disclaimer clauses. So, you can run those through ChatGPT, but now it's going exactly to what you want instead of accidentally having a hallucination. And then we've got agreements in there for workers, independent contractors, employees. It may take you a time to get there, but as you get there, you want to have them. And they're all sitting in this dashboard. And then, sponsorship. You're getting ads on, you got an Instagram account, that sort of thing. That's one where you actually do want it very heavy-handed, in my opinion. And ours is written that way because if you're putting your brand exposure there based on someone else advertising with you, you need to be able to control that. If they start going against the character of your business or against your audience in a way that it's having a negative impact, I want you to have control over that. And you can negotiate with that, but you certainly want to have content control. You want to have some more control there. So, we have them all there for you, and it grows with you. They've been, a real hit and I think really helpful they kind of came on organically out of our business as we're pricing people in through our law firm. Just the amount of time it takes to meet and interact, it just doesn't make a ton of sense for a lot of people starting out.
Yeah.
And so we're sensitive to that. And so we pivoted here to make sure everybody's got a good option they can rely on.
All right. And you've got a special offer for our listeners, correct?
Yep. We've got a code for you for anyone in your audience. The code is HOW2. You put that code in and you'll get 15% off the legal bundle. And then I'll also give you a 30-minute, just ask me anything. Won't be your lawyer, but if you got a question about a clause, should it be in there? Should it not? I can help guide you through that thought process.
Excellent.
Got a question?
That
about
alone,
an
the value here is, $400 or $500 easily with that.
Yeah, out of our law firm, if you're getting a consultation to listen and talk to you, it's at least $400. So yeah.
What's the website I go to for this?
It's draftedlegal.com, and you'll see the legal bundle up top, and you can purchase it from there.
Excellent. I'll have that also on the show notes page of this episode in case you're listening somewhere where you can't write that down. And so just go to thehowofbusiness.com, find this episode, search for Wesley, and I'll have links there as well as that promo code HOW2 to take advantage of that offer. We appreciate that, Wesley. All right, let's wrap it up. We've talked about a lot of different tactical things, but if you kind of boil it up and think about a small business owner from a legal perspective, what's one or two key things you want us to take away from this conversation?
I'd say three big things. Get an LLC. Make sure you're building a brand that you can own, and use contract. Just get comfortable with them. Nobody cares. They take you more seriously when you do. They're more professional. So just if you're going to start a business, take it seriously.
Yeah.
There's some advice I heard recently talking about how doing the right thing is more important than just doing things. And it really sits with me because doing the right thing goes so much farther than just being busy all the time. We're always busy all the time doing this and, almost just, I got to be doing something. It's important to make sure you're doing the right thing. And so the contracts are a real good manifestation of that. Have the right type of contract, and you may have saved yourself $50,000 or, in my world, you're talking about 7 figures of mistakes that go on. These are big time mistakes, and you're talking about $1,000 on contracts, or less than that for your audience.
Yeah, the liability protection is huge, but you make a great point as well that I think sometimes we don't stop to think about is that our clients see us more professional. They want it as well to protect them so that there's clarity. So it goes both ways. And I just had a client recently who's looking to sell their business, and they didn't have agreements in place for some components of the business. And the prospective buyer was, you got to get that in place first, because otherwise, what am I buying? Right.
Yeah.
So it serves that perspective as well. All right. Tell us again where you want us to go to learn more about your practice and where I find the contracts.
Yeah. Draftedlegal.com is where I'll send you, and you can, at the top of the page, there's a link to the legal bundle.
And if somebody wants your legal services, I'm sure from there they can link to Henderson.
Yeah, you can find it. If you type in my name, Wesley Henderson, law firm's Henderson and Henderson, you'll be able to find it. It's hhlawsc.com.
Wesley, thanks so much for sharing with me today, being so open to all my questions and giving us all this practical guidance, which is what we always look for on this podcast. Thanks for taking the time to be with me today.
Henry, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
This is Henry Lopez. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The How of Business. My guest today again, Wesley Henderson. Thank you. I release new episodes every Monday morning. You can find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts, including the How of Business YouTube channel and my website, thehowofbusiness.com. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to The How of Business. For more information about our coaching programs, online courses, show notes pages, links, and other resources, please visit thehowofbusiness.com.